Welcome to Rad Health, the podcast where we have the conversations that you wish you had with your doctor. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Cooper. I'm a chiropractic and functional medicine physician, a combat veteran, a husband, a father, and a dude who generally loves nature and all things nature stuff. So, I've got a show for you today that I'm pretty excited to deliver. I had enough requests for this that it has just amassed enough where I've got to do it. And that topic today is type 2 diabetes. So, given what you have heard about type 2 diabetes already and what you know, what would you say if I told you that type 2 diabetes is a reversible condition? Without drugs, done naturally, and the slew of terrifying consequences that goes along with type 2 diabetes, things like blindness, stroke, heart attack, gangrene and amputation, polyneuropathy, all those things. What if the chances of those increased risks of those conditions can go down to normal levels also? All without drugs, through natural means. Would you say I'm full of it? You think it's possible? Interested to know what you think about that. One of the reasons that I really like this topic is that the allopathic paradigm for type 2 diabetes is that it is a lifetime progressive condition. That means that you'll always have it and it'll always get worse. And truth be told, that's a crock of shit unless you keep doing all the stuff that got you there in the first place. Then it is totally true. So I love it. It's something that can be corrected fully, provided that there hasn't been end organ or tissue death. So if you already go blind, that's not going to come back. But if you had an amputation, you're not going to grow a leg back. It's not like that. But pre-tissue death, you can recover from type 2 diabetes. So that is what I'm going to tell you how to do today, is how to correct all the things necessary to just reverse type 2 diabetes. The caveat, I'm going to tell you to do things. So if you do them, it goes away and it works. If you don't, well, then you're just back in the same square that you're in before. And I guess I should put a disclaimer in here. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm not your personal physician. If you contact me and pay me, I will be your personal physician, but provided you're in Florida, actually, because my license is in Florida. But I'm just giving you advice for educational purposes. Take that for what you will. So, it's funny. I thought of this as I was thinking about, what I'd say for this podcast. And the reality is that when I was in Iraq, there was a phrase that we said a lot. It's called spray and pray. It was a style of shooting that people in the region did where they just kind of stick an AK over a wall, around a car, whatever it may be, and just pull the trigger hoping you hit something, typically not hitting anything, at least not hitting their target. And I like a term that somebody told me recently. It was pill and pray. I thought that was so funny, where you just hope you take the pill and whatever the ill is goes away. Unfortunately, for most of our conditions, there is some agency that you have to exert on yourself and your lifestyle to really fully resolve any of these conditions. A lot of the drugs that we have can suppress the symptoms, so you don't really notice them as much, but the physiology behind the scenes is still happening. So the tissue destruction, the physiological demise, all that is still happening. So it is really worth getting to the lifestyle root of what's going on with your condition, in this case type 2 diabetes, so that it can just be gone. And you don't have to worry about the concomitant problems that are associated with the condition. So I would like to almost maybe redirect the idea about type 2 diabetes. When you think of type 2 diabetes, I'm assuming that if anybody's told you anything about type 2 diabetes, they'll tell you it's a blood sugar problem. And while that is very true, blood sugar is elevated with type 2 diabetes. Is that the problem? Is it a symptom? Is it both? Can it be both? So what is actually going on here? And one of the things I would like to tell you is that the signaling is the bigger problem. So one of the things that is occurring with type 2 diabetes is that the signaling between glucose in the blood, hormones being produced, those hormones being noticed and acted upon by the cells, that whole process is on the fritz. One of the big issues with type 2 diabetes. So if you're only taking into account the glucose coming into the system, so the foods you eat, if that's the only piece that you're considering as being important in this context, you're really missing the boat, because some of the more powerful triggers and levers that you can pull to create change are occurring outside of the dietary intake. So this is the way it goes down with glucose utilization. So we have any digestible carbohydrate comes into the diet, gets absorbed, gets broken down into glucose, or one of the monosaccharides. It could be fructose, it could be galactose, it could be one of the other monosaccharides. But we'll just talk about glucose as the sugar, the sugars. All right, so glucose, if your carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, glucose absorbs into the bloodstream. Now we have glucose in the blood that is sensed by the body. Pancreas says, all right, glucose in the blood, great. I'm going to produce some insulin. Insulin's job is to interact with the cells and say, hey, I've got some glucose in the blood, open up and start dragging glucose out of the blood into the cells. We have these receptors on the cells that when insulin is present, recognize insulin, and when it is, pulls glucose into the cells. That's how we pull glucose from the blood into the cells and get it used. That's how we produce energy. So if by chance, for a slew of reasons, the insulin receptor doesn't act appropriately. So maybe it doesn't send the signal that says, insulin's here, open up. That's its job, though. It's the receptor. It's supposed to recept. It's supposed to receive the insulin and say, all right, let's do the work because insulin is around. Well, in the case of type 2 diabetes, or if you're pre-diabetic and you're insulin resistant, these are all just a progression along a continuum. This is what's happening. You might have, maybe you have an appropriate amount of glucose in your diet. It's not like an excessive sugar monster, Twizzlers and chocolate milk diet. Maybe it's normal, but, or, appropriate for a normal physiological functioning person. And if you have insulin resistance, that glucose in the blood signals insulin to be produced at an appropriate level, but then the receptors don't recognize it. And so its action it's not enacted. And so now we have glucose just chilling in the blood, a bunch of insulin chilling in the blood. That is one of the reasons you get all these follow-on problems to type 2 diabetes, is that excessive glucose and insulin in the blood are inflammatory to the inside of the vessels. And so when you think of blindness, you think of the neuropathies, these are the poor wound healing. These are all blood insufficiency problems. So the vasculature is being damaged and it's not perfusing like it should. And so the tissues degrade, and then whichever tissue it is, that's the symptom you get. If it's the retinal arterioles, the small vessels in the eye, blindness is the issue. If it's the lower extremities and it's the vessels that feed the nerves in the lower extremities, which is really common for this to happen, you get lower extremity polyneuropathies, numb foot, maybe it's burning foot, maybe you get clumsy because the proprioceptors are involved. Just depends on which nerves are involved, but you get these polyneuropathies. So big piece of it is the effect on vessels. So what do we do? What do we do about this? So here's some targets, some therapeutic targets that you should keep in mind when trying to solve this problem. The first one, I'll just throw out the big obvious elephant in the room first, blood glucose. So this is kind of a no-brainer. Lower your carb load. So if you're a carb monster yourself in the carb zone and eat less carbs. And timing is an issue here also. So if you are to continue eating, X amount of carbs, say it's an appropriate level. Say you're eating 150 grams of carbs a day and you eat them all before bed. Inappropriate timing. If you ate those same 150 grams of carbs before or after a workout, that right surrounding a workout time, it's great because you're going to burn glycogen. That's going to be a signal to suck glucose in to restore that glycogen, and you have no problems. It actually increases your insulin sensitivity, your insulin receptor sensitivity by doing it around those times. Okay, so if you're thinking lowering digestible carbohydrate load, it is more useful to think of not whole foods and like, oh, well, how much less broccoli should I eat? Well, that is a really poor example of restricting a food that would be useful in diabetes. So and the reason is because it doesn't have a lot of digestible carbs. So yes, it is a plant, it is a very carbohydrate heavy food, but it is a fibrous carbohydrate heavy food. And so it's not really affecting your blood sugar much, which leads us into glycemic index. So if you look up any charts on glycemic index, you'll see a bunch of foods that are closer to the top, and on those that are closer to the bottom as far as the highest and the lowest in glycemic index. And the ones that are higher in glycemic index spike your blood sugar more. And so it's a bigger just stimulus for insulin production. And those are the ones that are more detrimental for blunting the insulin sensitivity at the receptors, especially if you're done chronically. I mentioned putting your carbs around movement is a really important thing. Now, whether it's your heavy lifts, whether it's HIIT training, whether it's your walks in the neighborhood, it doesn't really matter. If you time it around movement, that's when it is most effective for being pulled into the tissues. Nutrient density is a really good measure to kind of mitigate the empty carb load, that high glycemic crap carb load. And so when you think nutrient density, it's high mineral content, high vitamin content, high other macronutrients per carb as well. So if it's a more well-rounded macronutrient meal with higher protein, higher fat in those carbohydrates, it actually slows down the absorption of those carbohydrates, and so it lowers its glycemic index. These are nutrient density factors that should go into your decision-making tree when you're thinking about which foods are going to affect my blood sugar and thus help me in my anti-diabetic journey better. And chemical avoidance. This is in every nutrient or dietary recommendation I put forth because there's so many chemicals in our food supply. It is staggering, and the widespread health damaging effects of those chemicals is also staggering. And with the context of diabetes, artificial sweeteners is a good one of these. So we're talking about chemicals, artificial sweeteners. You could talk about saccharin or aspartame and talk about its carcinogenic effects. Now, we're not talking about diabetes, we're talking about cancer now. But in the context of diabetes, they are still insulin stimulating because your brain recognizes the sweetness coming into this system or this organism that is me, and now I must produce insulin to shuttle the glucose into the cells, even though there isn't any glucose in that food. The brain still thinks there is because it's sweet. And so you're still getting an insulin response, even though there's no glucose. So you'll have a higher insulin load than you should. And as we talked about before, insulin, especially at high concentrations and high durations, is very inflammatory to the endothelial cells. That's the inside of the blood vessels. So chemical avoidance, some of these, like the microplastics that everyone's talking about now, pesticides, glyphosate, emulsifiers, these affect insulin signaling, but also inflammation as well. And when something increases inflammation, it increases stress hormones. Stress hormones like cortisol increase blood glucose. It causes you to dump glucose stores into the blood as well as fat stores into the blood for use. Because theoretically, if you're in a stress response, you should be fighting off a tiger or something, right? And so you need this energy in the blood to be utilized for the emergent event. But in the case of just stress, or in this context I just mentioned, is inflammation, which is a stress, you get a stress response from it, even though it's not a physical fight or flight kind of stress. Same cascade happens, you still get glucose dumped into the blood, which then results in insulin dumped into the blood, and the cascade continues. So it is worth the thought that every bite of food you have can either be medicine or poison to blood sugar regulation. And you need to take a step back and look at it via that compass and see, is this a good choice or a bad choice as far as the blood sugar regulation goes. So insulin receptor sensitivity is probably my favorite section to talk about with this, because people don't talk about the insulin receptor sensitivity a lot for some reason. There's some things that are awesome for increasing insulin receptor sensitivity, which means you need less insulin to elicit the response of dragging blood or glucose out of the blood into the cells, which you want. So resistance training, lift heavy, use big muscle groups, use multiple muscle groups, and bonus, do functional movement at high intensity, like with load. And now you've got a great movement style that is prophylactic to injury, but it's also going to be utilizing big muscle groups, using a lot of glycogen, which is stored glucose, and increasing the insulin receptor sensitivity. It also upregulates GLUT4 transporters, which GLUT4 transporters are non-insulin dependent. So it's going to suck glucose out of the blood via those transporters without even having insulin around. So it's even decreasing that glucose load even more. So hell yeah to resistance training for 100 different reasons. One of the other really good ones is the increase in mitochondrial density. So the stimulation to produce more mitochondria and increase the efficiency of the mitochondria you have as well, because active mitochondria suck up the products of glycolysis, which glycolysis is the breakdown of glycogen or of glucose. So another method by which you can increase the rate of clearance of glucose from the blood. When you're thinking resistance training, depending on your current state, it's hard to give a protocol just over a podcast, so I'm not going to try and do that. But 2 to 4 times a week is a general good recommendation. Full body lifts, if you're just kind of gym ratting it, so you're talking about like squats, deadlifts, pull-ups, rows, standing presses, stuff like that. Those are large muscle group exercises. If you're doing functional movement stuff, you just do them in ways that are more functional in nature, but still add rotation. So now you have even more muscle groups in play, and choose those kind of movements. Do them 2 to 4 times a week. The caveat there, because I don't know what your current fitness level is, you want to be able to maintain a progressive overload. So this is, a very standard weight training concept. You want to keep increasing your load over time. And, if you start at 4 times a week, but you're totally detrained, you'll be too sore. And the muscle breakdown that occurs during the exercise won't actually repair enough in between bouts. And so you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So you got to make sure you recover well between bouts is the only caveat there. Yeah, so what do you got to say about that? Okay, so we'll leave that as that for resistance training. The other big sexy for increasing insulin receptor sensitivity and just being so positive for mitochondria, HIIT training. HIIT training stands for high intensity interval training. This is, well, as the name would imply, something you do at high intensity in intervals. There's a bunch of different patterns of HIIT that you can do. I found for me that twice a week was about all I could handle for dedicated HIIT training because of the recovery aspect. You want to make sure you recover between bouts, just like I mentioned for resistance training. And I guess maybe when I go hard, I go real hard. I don't know. But 2 ended up being the sweet spot for me. And I was also doing a lot of resistance training. I was probably doing more than 4 times a week. So maybe that's another factor for me that kept me not able to do much more than 2 per week. But same self-regulation rules apply. Make sure you're recovering really well between bouts of HIIT training so that you're not increasing a stress response unduly. Now, one of the things that you like about HIIT training as far as the type 2 diabetes goes is we are increasing our insulin sensitivity by depleting muscle glycogen. So you're not stealing, but you're using a bunch of those glycogen stores. And so the body's asking for more. In order for more glucose to get sucked into the cells to be converted to glycogen, insulin receptors have to be working well. So that's a stimulus to improve the efficiency of those insulin receptors. It also stimulates PGC1 alpha, which that is a signaler that improves mitochondrial biogenesis. That is the production of mitochondria, and metabolic flexibility. In type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance blunts the body's ability to access and use glucose efficiently. So over time, this can impair fat metabolism as well. So now, you're not utilizing glucose well, I'm not metabolizing fat well, and it's just a really bad situation to get into. So you're locked in this dysfunctional, I can't really use energy well pattern, and your body's going to want to rely on sugar in this context, but it also doesn't use sugar well, so you're just in a bad metabolic place. If you have high metabolic flexibility, it means you can transition between glucose and fat and even ketones for energy production. Your body easily shifts between them, and that's what you want. You want this metabolic flexibility so that you can have consistent energy throughout the day. You don't have cognitive crashes because the brain is a very energy inefficient organ. It uses more glucose than any other tissue in the body per ounce of tissue. And so if you have glucose utilization problems, you get brain fog. You lose your train of thought. You get confused. You're not as creative. You're not as generally intelligent. Your memory's not as good. So these are all things that will improve when your metabolic flexibility improves because you have consistent energy for brain functions. Some signs of metabolic inflexibility: constantly craving carbs, crashing between meals. That's that, after lunch, oh God, I got to take a nap. That is an indicator of poor metabolic flexibility. We have inability to go more than a few hours without eating. Those hangry folks, getting hangry is a sign of metabolic inflexibility and not great blood glucose control. And if you were to actually test elevated fasting insulin or glucose levels, are both indicators of metabolic inflexibility. So these are some things you can maybe see in yourself or in others around you and say, hey, maybe you should check out this diabetes reversal program and get rid of that hangry attitude you got. Okay, so for your protocols for HIIT training, like I mentioned, twice a week tends to be sufficient. Maybe it's once a week. Just make sure you recover well between bouts. There's a number of different patterns that you can do HIIT training. You can do like 4 rounds of 30-second max efforts. And the efforts, what are the efforts? So the efforts could be anything: sprints, kettlebell swings, rowing, assault bike, regular bike, actually on the road. I've done swimming before. When I was training for a specific event, I was doing HIIT training with swimming as my mode of a high intensity. It doesn't really matter. The intensity is what matters and the duration is what matters. So there's a couple that are named, like Tabata. Like when I was doing CrossFit a lot back in the day, Tabata was something I remember hearing in CrossFit. I actually didn't even know what it was. When it was programming the workouts, like, oh, whatever, I'll just follow the workout. But what a Tabata is a 20-second max effort followed by a 10-second rest. You do for 8 rounds. Wingate is another method that is 30-second max effort with 4-minute active recovery. Active recovery is different than rest. So if you're just resting, that's, not moving. You sit down, you just stand there, whatever you want to do. Light recovery or active recovery is where you're walking, maybe you're like very gently jogging in place, something like that. That would be a light recovery. And I said 46 rounds for that one. There's a conventional, like if you like easy numbers, 1 minute on, 1 minute recovery, active recovery for 10 rounds. It's very, very decimal point kind of metric oriented. Norwegian 4x4. This one's a little on the brutal side because the active part of this, the go hard part of this, is 4 minutes. So 4 minutes on. It's not going to be absolute max because 4 minutes is too long to go absolute max effort, but it is a lot of effort. It's a non-talking level of effort. Followed by 3 minutes of active recovery, and you do it for 4 rounds. So there's just some options for your pattern of how to do HIIT training. They all work. So whichever one you like or seems interesting to you, that is all fine. These like intense bouts of exercise are very like reset button pressing for the metabolism. It's kind of like fasting. Fasting is another activity that is very reset button oriented. So if you wanted to start this and you wanted to like give yourself a big hello, I'm about to crush my diabetes, and maybe you start with a 4-day fast. If you've never done a fast before, and if you're really, very metabolically inflexible, have somebody around. Don't do it by yourself, and make sure you're supervised because, you could crash, you could fall. There could be consequences of non-safety if things like this occur with too quick blood sugar crashes. But I will say that the metabolic reset that occurs with a fast is just really quick. And so if you do a 4-day fast, it's like doing a few weeks of intermittent fasting, which would be you eat every day, but in a shortened eating window, starting with a 4-day fast. Or if you don't want to do it because that sucks, especially on day 2, maybe you do an intermittent fast. You just start intermittent fasting, which just means you shorten your eating window. Try to do it in an 8-hour eating window first. If you're not used to intermittent fasting, maybe you're somebody who eats the second you wake up and you eat right before you go to bed. So truncate that window to 8 hours. If you can get it down to 6 hours, there's a lot of physiological benefits with a 6-hour eating window. The benefits of intermittent fasting They're very similar to the benefits of fasting, but I'll just talk about intermittent fasting like this because you'll get these continued benefits every day versus on a fast, you're just going to get it whenever you're fasting. And then as soon as you stop fasting, the benefits go away. But if you make this a lifestyle where you do intermittent fasting every day, then you'll get it each day during that 18-hour period. You're going to be getting these benefits, which are, and the ones that excite me at least, I'll tell you the ones that excite me. Increase in mitochondrial efficiency and mitochondrial number. You'll build mitochondrial density with this. Autophagy is what I'm really excited about. So autophagy is the destruction, and it stands for self-eating, autophagy. But what it is, your immune cells eat dead or dying or poor health cells of your own. So you have cells that are, kind of haggard and not doing so hot. They'll get cleaned out. Also in the brain, plaquing in the brain. The lymphatic system is the lymphatic system of the brain, gets very active when you're fasting. So it cleans out plaques like no tomorrow. That's awesome. You want a clean, healthy brain. It's where you interpret life. So that is one of my biggest positives with fasting or intermittent fasting is the autophagy that occurs and the lymphatic activation that occurs with fasting. So let's see here. Another lever that you can pull, cold exposure. So there's been tons of studies on cold exposure, as of late at least, that I've seen that, and I say as of late, like in the last 8 years, say. I don't think it's been back as 10 years, but I've seen them in the last 8 years or so. Cold exposure has a lot of benefits. There's been a lot of speculatory benefits that I think spurred a lot of the research, and now they're being confirmed. So we have adiponectin being produced with cold exposure. Adiponectin is a hormone that improves insulin sensitivity. So great, we want that. It reduces chronic low-grade inflammation. And like we mentioned with chronic inflammation, inflammation results in oxidative stress, tissue damage. When you have chronic inflammation, you have stress hormones and cortisol being produced. You have glucose and fatty acids being dumped into the blood, increasing insulin. So it's perpetuating this insulin receptor insensitivity issue. So cold exposure can help you with that. Now, whether it's cold showers, depending where you live, it's funny, I'm in Florida and the coldest shower it gets is, I guess in the winter it might get a little cold, but it doesn't get that cold. The lukewarm is kind of as cold as it gets. So I do them every day. Like it's just, I haven't taken a hot shower in years. But then I go to my wife's parents' place in Wisconsin. Oh, that water's cold. So especially you go in the winter, you're like, oh my God. So depending where you live, your cold showers might be colder or less cold than others. If you want to do cold plunges where you actually go into a bath of cold water, it doesn't have to be crazy cold. The best results are being shown somewhere in the mid 50s range. They're like 52 to 58, 59 degrees, somewhere in there. You're getting all the benefits. So all these guys are going down to like 39 degrees, 40, into the 40s. Like you don't need it. Unless you're just trying to like toughen yourself, like mentally steel yourself against these outside forces, then maybe you get some utility there. But as far as the physiological benefits, you get them in the 50s. So I'm sticking to the 50s. If there's cryotherapy available to you, maybe you use that as well, or in lieu of any of these things because it's shorter. So with cryotherapy, you go in these chambers that get super, super cold and you stand for much less time. It's like 30 seconds to a minute is the sit time in those versus 5 or 10 minutes in a cold plunge bath. A lot of people talk about graduating yourself into the cold showers, like start with a hot shower, then like make your last 3 or 4 minutes. Just turn it to cold at the end of the shower. If you need to do that. But get over that pretty quick because that's weak. I'm just messing with you. I talked about the pathway of inflammation results in stress, which increases cortisol, which increases glucose in the blood, which increases insulin in the blood, which is damaging to the endothelial cells of the vessels. So brown fat activation. Brown fat's, typically seen in babies, and it's a very metabolically active fat. Typically white fat that is on, most of us is very metabolically inactive. So brown fat activation is a metabolically active fat. So it's just something else, another tissue that's going to be burning calories, which come from either glucose or fat. And so it's just another metabolic furnace within you, and it is induced by cold exposure. let's see, sleep optimization is something you cannot pass by. The sleep optimization. It is a topic that is needed for so many people. It's beneficial for so many things. Like pretty much every piece of your life gets better when you sleep. And one of the things that's seen with even one night of crap sleep, 30% decrease in insulin sensitivity. Damn, you ever notice you have a trash night of sleep and you wake up just hungry in general, but then hungry for carby stuff because your insulin sensitivity goes to shit and your cells aren't getting glucose into them. And so you're craving more carbs to get glucose into the cells, but it's because your insulin receptors are blunted. So good sleep can manage the sensitivity of your insulin receptors as well. That's super important. One thing that happens with sleep that I'll mention, actually mentioned cortisol with stress and inflammation, and trash sleep increases cortisol also. So you're getting the whole same cascade we talked about before with increased cortisol. But then it is worth noting that increased cortisol means decreased growth hormone, decreased testosterone, decreased leptin, increased ghrelin. Leptin and ghrelin are hunger and satiety hormones in inverse there. So ghrelin is a hunger hormone and leptin is a satiety hormone. And so if you have a decreased leptin, you're less satiated, equals hungrier. Increased ghrelin, hungrier. And so that's another reason that the poor sleep jacks up your appetite, because leptin and ghrelin are dysfunctional. And with growth hormone and testosterone being decreased because of the elevated cortisol, now your recovery is worse at night. So your cellular recovery, your tissue recovery, that recovery from your exercise or just your daily stuff that goes on in your day is worse. So sleep, paramount importance. I'll just leave it at that. What does that look like? 7.5 to 9 hours tends to be like that sweet spot of where pretty much everybody's going to do great there. A lot of people will think, well, the more is better, and that's not always the case. You'll see extreme amounts of sleeping in depression and things like that. More is not always better with that. Timing of sleep. So we have circadian rhythms, and all that just means you have daily rhythms, but our bodies we're part of nature. And so our bodies are synced with the sun also. We have daily rhythms from hormone production, in addition to a bunch of other things that are linked to daily rhythms. Our hormones are also. So you have naturally ideal times to produce either growth hormone, cortisol, testosterone. You have actually 2 peaks of testosterone in the day. You might think, I've slept 9 hours. It was from 2 a.m. to 11 a.m. I got my 9 hours. But it's super counter to your circadian rhythm. So you're still getting junk hormone production those times because you are awake, and cortisol is an alertness hormone. You have more cortisol when you should have been producing your ideal growth hormone, and so it just jacks up the hormone cascade. So your timing of sleep is also important. If you're a shift worker, you can do things to shift your circadian clock forward or backward to accommodate shift work. If you shift work regularly, that's a good thing to do to help your recovery at night or when you sleep. But otherwise, shift work is really tough. I mean, it's not doing your whatever you can to shift your circadian rhythm to adapt to your whatever your shift time is. It's a mitigating step, but it still doesn't make it as good as if you stuck to the sun rhythm. Okay, so let's go to, actually before we bump to our next lever, one thing with the sleep deal, letting your body know that it's awake is important because it starts your circadian clock. And so if you were to wake up, say you wake up at like a normal time, so you're waking up in the actual morning, not in the late morning or early afternoon, and it's somewhere around sunrise. Maybe it's a little after sunrise, but you go right outside. If you go right outside, so you're getting light in your eyes from the sun, maybe you do a little exercise. These are both triggers to say, I'm awake, let's start the day, and your circadian clock will start. If you just kind of like mope around the house in low light from when you wake up until, it's 11:30. Oh, okay, I'm gonna go outside now. Maybe I'll take the trash out and do whatever. and the triggers really weren't set until later, in this case 11:30. And it short circuits your circadian clock. It's not matching it to the actual sun rhythm, and you're kicking yourself in the leg as far as your sleep goes. It would be very helpful if you would get out and do something sun-oriented, exercise-oriented, as soon as you can after you wake up to set that circadian clock. Okay, stress mitigation is another big piece here because I guess it's almost broken record like now at this point with the chronic stress and the effects of chronic stress on your physiology. And in this context of type 2 diabetes, it's all the same. You've got chronic stress equals elevated cortisol, which equals elevated glucose and insulin in the blood, which results in insulin resistance. So what do? Find a stress mitigation technique that works for you. I like working outside or just walking outside, and running on trails is a bliss state for me. And it depends on what it is for you. So breath work might be a thing where you're doing actual breathing exercises. A lot of people love that. Plus you're getting the neurological hack of activating your vagus nerve when you do breath work with your diaphragm. And so you get a focus centering activity while doing a neurological hack of activating the vagus, which is one of your main parasympathetic nerves. And so it can activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your chill out side of your nervous system. Maybe new novelty exposure. That could be play. That could be learning something new, as long as you enjoy the learning. Sex is pretty stress mitigating as well. Sun is another one that's available on the daily. And adventurous things. Being excited about your life. So finding something you're excited about and engaging in it. These are all stress busting activities. Social connection is another one that's really big, especially if it's a nurturing social connection. That's great. Gratitude journaling. There's like tons of research on gratitude journaling. There's so much research on gratitude journaling. So there's something about shifting your mindset into your mindset and your body set. So actually feeling the gratitude, not just saying I'm grateful for, but actually like feeling that gratitude for whatever it is you're grateful for, has a great stress relieving effect on the body. And since your emotional inputs directly affect your hormonal outputs and thus insulin resistance, stress mitigation is a very essential piece in this whole puzzle. So, a lot of people love talking about supplements and things like that. And I mean, I get it. Doing all these lifestyle strategies that I just mentioned, these are the things that are the daily bulk of what is going to move the needle. Now you can accelerate those results with supplemental intake. And things that are really important, like magnesium, that's a cofactor for insulin receptor function. 400 to 800 milligrams a day tends to be the recommendation for that. Chromium is important for insulin signaling. Alpha-lipoic acid is another one. It's kind of like a double whammy. It's an antioxidant that is specific to mitochondria, and it is also an antioxidant to insulin receptor pathways. So, just keeping them actually healthier and less degraded by reactive oxygen species. Coenzyme Q10 is an antioxidant that is specific to mitochondria also, and we talked about how mitochondrial efficiency and number and quality are very important. One is a signaler, but also as a utilizer of glucose, or at least the byproducts of glucose. Acetyl-L-carnitine improves mitochondrial fat utilization. So if you're metabolically inflexible, it helps you use fat for fuel. And so you can help regain that metabolic flexibility. Berberine has been like all the rage for like 15 years now. And it mimics metformin, or at least it mimics the action of metformin. It's not like it's a plant. So, metformin probably was designed to mimic berberine, but either way, they work similarly. Omega-3s, optimizing your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is really important for helping your body be able to produce anti-inflammatory compounds. Also maintaining membrane fluidity, like your cell membrane fluidity. Avoiding trans fats, since I'm talking about membrane fluidity, avoiding trans fats is really important for maintaining cell membrane fluidity also. The way that the trans fats pack together makes your cell membrane stiff and they don't signal as well. And then carb timing. I mean, total load, sure, if you got an overabundance of carbohydrates in your daily diet, you want to limit that load. Over and above that, timing the carbohydrates to be consumed right around your workouts is primo. So I guess the takeaway would be that fixing insulin resistance isn't just about lowering sugar intake. It's about restoring cellular communication. Muscle is the entry point, but it is so worth noting, and muscle is a big factor here, but it's so worth noting that sleep, stress, movement in the right ways, these are all big players in improving the entire glucose and insulin signaling pathway and improving type 2 diabetes. Vessel health. Like I mentioned before, all those concomitants, follow-on conditions that go along with type 2 diabetes, they're mostly vessel damage oriented. So improving vessel health is going to be essential for someone who's been living with diabetes for any extended period of time. One of the big start points is normalizing blood pressure. So blood pressure, when it's high, is an insult to the blood vessels. And the way, if you're not familiar with how plaquing in the vessels works, you get an injurious event that then has to be repaired. Part of that repair process is plaquing. So your body will plaque to essentially form a scab over the damaged part of the vessel. And then, it heals underneath the plaque and the plaque goes away. There are some situations in which you plaque excessively. Some of them could be that you have hypercoagulability disorders, and there could be some disorder kind of stuff. But oxidized cholesterol is the cholesterol that is shown to be the hyperplaquer. So you could not have a disorder, but if you have a bunch of oxidized cholesterol, that will add to these excessively large plaques that occur in vessels. So blood pressure, what are you going to do about it? A few things. So stress mitigation again, because stress increases the tension. So your vessels will actually contract. The arterial side of the vascular system will contract, which when the heart beats, it just boom, boom, hits those vessels harder because they're squeezed a little tighter. So you can do breath work. HRV tracking is fun. You can use it as HRV is heart rate variability. And if you can track that, you can use that as a measure, as a biofeedback measure. And so you can start to see, as you shift your habits throughout your days, what's working, what's not. Because heart rate variability is one of those, it's a good measure. Cold exposure is another one. Grounding is another one for stress mitigation. Quitting smoking is your number one modifiable risk factor for heart disease and cardiovascular disease. So if you're a smoker, you stop smoking. Just stop smoking. Even if you don't have any of these things going on, you're a smoker. For God's sake, stop smoking. Somebody is going to comment on here about nicotine being neuroprotective. And I actually learned about this when I was doing that neurology diplomate. And the father of functional neurology, Ted Carrick, he mentioned to me that nicotine, I think I might ask him why he smoked a cigar. and he said, nicotine's neuroprotective. The data on it turning around and preventing Parkinson's and slowing progression of Parkinson's is, it's hands down. So I'm going to take in nicotine. Now, is smoking the best way to get it? Probably not. It's becoming quite the industry right now. In the last few years, a couple of years, it has not been that long, the nicotine has gotten popular. I would caution this. Watch what else is in it. I've looked at these products, and a lot of the products have a bunch of other just chemical shitstorm in the product as well as nicotine. So stay on the natural side of things. You can not just be injuring yourself with other stuff if you're trying to get some nicotine in. All right, so getting me off nicotine. Let's see. Increasing, so endothelial nitric oxide production, and stimulus for the contraction and dilation of vessels is what is the stimulus to produce nitric oxide in the endothelium. So we're back to the exercise. So cold exposure, HIIT training, heavy lifts, any exercise for that matter actually is nitric oxide producing. I can leave it at that. Exercise is great for increasing the nitric oxide production, which is vessel relaxing. When you produce nitric oxide, that is the A compound that can relax the vessels. Endogenous antioxidant systems. I like talking about these. And when I say endogenous, that just means produced within you. Exogenous would be things that are taken from the outside and brought into you. So if I take some vitamin C, that's an exogenous antioxidant that I'm taking in. Within your body, you produce like three big ones: glutathione, superoxidase mutase, and catalase. These are three antioxidant enzymes that are produced within you, and they account for 90% of all the antioxidant activity that occurs in your day, every day. So optimizing those systems is a juggernaut for improving your antioxidant capacity. bonus, glutathione also has its own detoxification pathway in the liver. So you've got a really good reason to help your endogenous antioxidant system kick ass. Let's see why you care. One of the reasons you care is that when you have excessive oxidation, there's this inflammation oxidation loop that happens. If you have excessive inflammation, it'll cause oxidation. If you have excessive oxidation, it'll cause inflammation. And then the whole cascade that we've been talking about a bunch of times now ensues. How do you support the production of these enzymes? So N-acetylcysteine is something you could take that it's a precursor to glutathione. Selenium is important for the production of glutathione. Vitamin C. Sulforaphane would be a stimulant. We have this NRF2 pathway, which is a pathway that causes you to produce these, a lot of people call them your survival enzymes, but it's these antioxidant enzymes that I just mentioned. And sulforaphane is a compound in broccoli and broccoli sprouts. So you could take that or eat those. Coffee, sunlight, these are also stimulus for the NRF2 pathway. Sauna, intermittent fasting, good sleep. These are all slight stresses, hormetic stresses that will cause the NRF2 pathway to kick on and increase the efficiency of the production of glutathione, superoxidase mutase, and catalase. So you want those. And the reason I mentioned, the main reason I put this in here is two things. You've got, when you decrease overall oxidation, you're just increasing the health of those endothelial cells within the vessels. So they're just able to handle more stuff. But then also the oxidized cholesterol. So since oxidized cholesterol is the bad mamma jamma that clogs up the arteries and is the hyperplaquer, if you can decrease the oxidation of that cholesterol by making your antioxidant enzyme system, the endogenous system, working really efficiently, then you can decrease your oxidized cholesterol that's floating around in your blood waiting to jump on a plaque. So the 4 levers that I mentioned, we had targets, at least for you to go after: blood glucose, insulin receptor sensitivity, vessel health, endogenous antioxidant system. Optimize those, diabetes goes away. So the good news is that type 2 diabetes is a signaling issue at its core. Luckily, your body's wired to respond if you give the right signals. So those inputs are what is really important. Hopefully, after hearing this, you see that you have way more control over the inputs going into your body than you might have thought. You have all these other options for positive inputs to affect your insulin receptor sensitivity and total glucose signaling system. So if you are somebody who needs help with this, you need more information, reach out. It's a topic I love. If you actually need like hand holding with this, I offer that also. So you could do that with me. If not me, and you need the hand holding, make sure you find somebody, because getting through this and getting this to be something that is in the rearview mirror, not part of your life anymore, it gives you so much life back. It's something that's interesting when you think about costs for things, and people try to put value on certain items or whatever it is. And it's easy when you have a monetary value that's replacing one with the other. Like, I have to pay this, if I pay this much for this and it saves me this, then you can see dollars for dollars. But how do you put a price tag on getting your life back and getting abilities back, feeling vibrant and feeling energetic? So getting to do these cool things that you kind of wish you could do, and you just assumed, I'm old now, this has happened, whatever, I've got whatever going on, I'll never be able to do it again. But then you can. What is that worth? I don't know. That's a personal choice. Okay, so thank you for listening. This is one of my favorite topics, and I would love to do something a little more directed. This is kind of a shotgun blast on the topic of diabetes. But if you want to know more, ask me about it. If this was helpful, I'm really glad. If you think someone that you know needs to hear this information, make sure you shoot them this episode and have them listen in. If you haven't already, subscribe. And if you need to contact me, you can comment on the old YouTube. Instagram is a better option. If you want to hit me on Instagram, that's Dr. Dan Cooper, Dr. Dan Cooper at Instagram. I will be more likely to see your DM than I will your comment on any of the other platforms. In the meantime, best in health, brothers.